My name's Erica Duecy, and I'm the Chief Content Officer here at PIX. And this is our first PIX Winemaker Chat. Woohoo! We're thrilled that you've joined us tonight. And if you're new to PIX, we're a wine discovery platform that helps you find and buy the wines that you'll love. How we do that is a couple different ways. We have an intuitive search engine. We have really informative content. And then we also have events like this, where you can meet some of the most exciting people in the wine world. I will be our MC for the evening, and I am so delighted to have Dan Petroski of Massican as our very first guest for our PIX Winemaker Chats. If you don't already know Dan, he, for the past 15 years, has been the winemaker at Larkmead, which is one of the oldest family-owned estates in Napa Valley. Under his leadership during that time, the value of the Cabernet Sauvignons went from $150 to $300, massive feat. And he recently left Larkmead. He already had started Massican several years ago, but he recently left to go full-time at Massican. And this is a winery which makes Italian-inspired wines. It's a really exciting project that I can't wait to hear more about. Dan has just so many accolades. He's been named the San Francisco Chronicle's Winemaker of the Year. He has top rated bottles, both Massican and the Larkmead bottles, in all of the big wine publications. And not only that, he has so many innovative and interesting projects that we're going to talk about tonight, ranging from cocktails to cryptocurrency to politics and lifestyle publications. Dan is the Renaissance man who does so many interesting things. So Dan, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Awesome to be here, Erica. Thank you so much. I'm honored that I'm PIX's first winemaker chat, and hopefully it doesn't go downhill from here. But just to let everyone know, I had the great good fortune to see Erica Duecy in person last week in New York City, my first travel outside of the Valley of Napa since COVID had started. And I've known Erica for a number of years, and this is just a continuation of that conversation. So really super excited to be here, continuing that conversation. We did not have enough time to catch up last week. So yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Well, I think the first thing we need to do is to get everyone started with a glass of wine. I have this here, the Vino Bianco 2020. And so I am really interested to hear about, now I wasn't sure, was this the first year that you've made Vino Bianco?
Yes. There's a long history to why this wine exists, but there's a, I'll try to keep it as short as possible. But just this year, 2020 vintage, as I was heading into the vintage, I knew I was going to have an exclusive project to distribute wines nationally through Whole Foods. But I also knew that that was going to be a very small national program. It wasn't going to be in every market because Massican as a winery is quite small from our production levels. So we were able to kind of get Massican into a unique Massican wine under $25 a bottle into 30 different Whole Foods markets nationwide. But I didn't want that to be a discouragement or disappointment to my mailing list customers. So I wanted to offer my mailing list and people who shopped on the web an exclusive wine that they could get if they weren't in a market that carried the Massican wines at Whole Foods. So Vino Bianco became that kind of compatible or that kind of parallel path of wine, but it's been something that I've wanted to do for years. I wanted to bring a price point of Massican down under $30. $30, I believe, is a very expensive bottle of wine for most people. It's probably a very inexpensive bottle of wine for Napa Valley, but it's so I wanted a 20, under $25 price point wine available to new customers, to existing customers. And I just have to give props to my wife for a second here, because while I was away in New York City this past week, she said to me when I got back, she goes, "You need to figure out how to communicate to your customers how great this wine is to drink every single day." And she goes, "It is just, I have 3 glasses and I go to bed the next morning and I'm excited that there's still 2 glasses left in the bottle the next night." And I talked about the alcohol with her. It's 11.5%. She goes, "It's not the alcohol. It's not that it's a low alcohol, low calorie, wine, it's a very interestingly weighted wine. So as you think about this wine, you can sip this wine throughout the rest of the tasting and the chat, and you won't even know it exists. It's just kind of like flutters on the palate. It's really kind of savory and salty, and feels like, you know, feels like the Mediterranean Sea. Smells a little bit of kind of that rusticity and that savoriness and sea foam. And it's just it's a new product, a new project, and it really harkens me back to that Friuli concept that I started with when I started Massican in 2009.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, this is like definitely vacation on the Amalfi Coast sort of wine. I love that saltiness. It just like takes me right to the coast of Italy.
And that has been, you know, the Massican started because of my year living in the south of Italy between 2005 to 2006. I spent a year working on a vineyard in Sicily. During that period of time, we spent, you know, majority of it drinking white wines, especially the white wines of Mount Etna, which I lived right under the kind of the shadows of Mount Etna. And it was, you know, it was just the climate, southern Mediterranean climate, southern, you know, Italian Mediterranean climate is not too dissimilar to Napa. Napa has, you know, the high diurnal shifts, warm days, cool nights. But here in Napa Valley and Sonoma County, we're programmed to drink incredibly delicious and fruit-forward wines, whether they be Pinot Noirs from Sonoma County or Cabernets from Napa Valley. And it just seemed out of cultural context for me that we would be drinking these big, rich, bold wines while sitting outside at dinner while we're still potentially 80 degrees at 8 p.m. So I kind of like just put two and two together, and I said, all right, let's bring the Mediterranean back to Napa Valley. And you know, prior to you know the Napa Valley kind of hockey stick growth from the mid 90s to the present day, you know, the wines, you know, it was very much like Europe. You have the French, you have the Italians, you have the Germans, you have the Spanish. They all had their own grape varieties planted and their own, you know, kind of parcels of Napa Valley. They didn't do business with each other. You know, I worked for an Italian family for 15 years. It's been in Italian hands for more than 50 years, and they never sold their grapes to BV because they were French, you know. Yeah. So it was crazy. So so I said, let's bring a little bit of the Mediterranean back, and that's really how Massican was the origin story in 2009.
Well, tell me, like, so you started out your career actually in publishing. You had a decade-long career in publishing before you sort of caught the wine bug and then made this trip to Italy. So take me through, like, what was it? How did you catch the wine bug?
Yeah, it was during those kind of formative 20-something years in age 20-something years in New York City. But my love of publishing wasn't just that decade. It's a lifelong love. I was a magazine reader when I grew up as a kid. I wasn't a book reader per se. I always say that, you know, I'm proud of being like one of the founding subscribers of Condé Nast Traveler when I was a teenager. And that was important to me because growing up in Brooklyn, New York, an Italian-American family, we blue collar, you know, we weren't traveling. I mean, the farthest I went outside of New York City and Brooklyn was Jersey. Hello, New Jersey, to anyone on the call. My sisters live there, Erica. So I transported myself through the pages of magazine, the glossy pages of magazines, and I worked in publishing for 10 years, at Time Magazine and Sports Illustrated. During that period of time, living in Manhattan, eventually getting to a point where I had a corporate credit card and I was able to entertain guests at restaurants or clients at restaurants in and out of Manhattan. And I was very smart. I worked on the finance side for a few years as well. I was very smart at managing my T&E budget and figuring out how to take it an extra mile. And you know, the easiest thing to do was not allow a client to take the wine list and order insignia at a steakhouse when I can get them to order, you know, Les Mistral, which was Joseph Phelps's Syrah-based wine that was, you know, a fifth of the price. And I could tell them a story about the Mistral winds and the Rhone Valley and how, you know, Napa Valley is very Mediterranean and this is a Syrah and it's Joseph Phelps, the same people who make insignia. This is like your insider's radar, under the radar wine. And clients loved that, and it was over. And then I was like, ooh, I just saved $300 tonight on dinner. And now I can do this again tomorrow. So that was
I
how I
love
got into
that.
wine. I got into wine
Yeah.
by reading about it, memorizing a few stories, memorizing a few characteristics of the wines. And so I can kind of like swirl and sniff and like and pretend I'm knowledgeable. And you know, during that period, the best thing that ever happened to me was Berry Brothers in Red, really great website for a really great retailer in London. In 1998, they had a audio link on their websites to pronounce every wine bottle in their shop.
Oh,
So you
wow.
can learn how to say Jerry Camberton instead of saying Gervie Camberton, you know, in front of a psalm. That was truly empowering.
That's cool.
And so I took all angles to get to a singular place, which was to be the guy who was given the wine list and was supposed to tell the story at a corporate dinner. That was my goal, because
Yeah.
I was able to do a lot of them if I added value and extended my value through like not spending so much money.
Totally. And so at one point you're like, you know what? I'm out of here. I'm out of publishing right now. I am heading to where?
Sicily. So yeah, I had a midlife crisis. That's the short answer to it. And it truly was, you know, after a conversation with my mom, and when I was just before my 33rd birthday, I said, you know, she told me she was going to work till she was 70, and she did. And I was like, wow, that's another 40 years of my life. I love Time Inc. and I want to be here. I want to run one of these magazines, maybe the company one day. But holy shit, that's another 40 years of my life. Let me take a pause. You know, at the 15-year mark at Time Inc., they give you a 6-month paid sabbatical. I said, I don't know if I have another 5 years in me. I think I might burn out a little bit. And the industry was starting to evolve, 2004, 2005. So I had a couple of really dear friends from business school that we traveled to different parts of the world every year after school. And one of them was a Sicilian kid, and we went and visited him, his family and friends, and I fell in love with the place for a week. Came back home to the United States. A couple of months later, when I had an opportunity to go to another publishing company, the Wall Street Journal, and Dow Jones, I said, you know, if I'm going to leave Time Inc., which is like glossy magazines and also news magazines, important cultural and magazines, I'm going to do something big. And doing something big was basically removing myself from New York City for a year and going to live in an island in the Mediterranean and working on a vineyard. And that's how I ended up in Sicily, working with the family that owns Valle dell'Acate, a small cooperative in Italy's, Sicily's southeast corner. I worked in vineyards, didn't learn how to make wine. I didn't really learn how to grow grapes either, because I had to learn Italian, learn Sicilian, learn Sicilian farm worker. So it was like a 3-tier system of like trying to learn the language. And then before I knew it, I was a year later, and I was like heading back to the United States.
Yeah. And so from that point, you go to Larkmead. Tell me about your evolution and kind of, I know you started, was it either an intern or an assistant winemaker, and then, you know, very quickly rose up to the head winemaker. I'm curious to hear about the evolution of your winemaking during that period. And it was 15 years, is that right?
Yeah, just under 15 years total. I was fortunate enough to a friend of a friend to meet Andy Smith, who was the winemaker at Dumal and also the consulting winemaker at Larkmead. He hired me as an intern in 2006 harvest to work at Dumal, but also to spend some time at Larkmead, because it was proving to be, you know, at that point in time in the summer, that it was going to be a big crop. And when, you know, the old adage in the wine viticultural agricultural industry is, a big crop gets bigger, a small crop gets smaller. And so he was like, I need another pair of hands. And I had just gotten introduced to him in July, and he said he wasn't planning on hiring another intern, but he did, and it was me. So I got out there August 1st of 2006, and I remember it dearly. It was Halloween, and he called me into this little office in the place where he was making wine in Santa Rosa, and said, hey, I'd like to hire you full time. I was like, to do what? I don't know how to make wine. I was planning on going back to New York to like integrate myself into the wine sales and marketing community there. And he said, I want you to be the cellar master at Larkmead. And I was like, okay. And it was right time in the right place. It was, so I was a very curious wine drinker, very curious wine, kind of student of wine. And I was a hard worker. I'm harvest to me was like, I played high school and college football. Harvest to me was like that preseason, run up to the full, like the season and then it was, so I was accustomed to every August, September, doing a lot of practice in very warm conditions and in preparing yourself to be physically fit for the season. So that was like, it was just normal. It was like I just turn it on and go. And so, working, 6 days a week, 10 to 12-hour days was nothing, which what it was in '06, it was a very large crop. And that really helped me kind of, the repetition of it, just like playing any sport, whether it's swinging a golf club or, running routes for a football team. The repetition of wine was something you get to do every day, so you can kind of perfect your technique of it. And so I always, people hate when I say this, but I'm like, making wine is manufacturing wine. You have to take these grapes, you have to ferment them under certain conditions, and the choices you make in that manufacturing process will help you get to the final destination, which is the craft and the art. It's like designing what it's supposed to look like before you even have an opportunity to make the wine. If you just take harvest a ton of grapes and say, okay, now let's start the process of what I want this to be, I think that's crazy. That's just my approach. And so it was years of really, just repetition, tasting on my own. I moved, Massican to biodynamic conceptual winemaking because for 3 to 4 straight years, I tasted wine in barrel at Larkmead, and I was tasting the same barrels to initiate myself with what the different parcels on the property and the estate. And I was like, why does it taste different today than it tasted, a week ago or a month ago or 6 months ago? What's the evolution? But within a week, how is it going to evolve so much? And I started looking at like whether it was, and I started recording the weather, temperature with those tastings, the weather outside, whether it was raining, whether it was hot, whether it was dry, low pressure, high pressure, if we were in ascending moon or descending moon. So I wanted to look at all the variables that it would interact with a living thing that was evolving over time, that was decaying and dying, but also being lifted by the the evolutionary process of fermentation and post fermentation. So that's how I taught myself how to make wine, and to see the wine before it ever even got to bottle. And to see the wine where it stands in your glass on your table in front of you, whether it's 1 year old or 10 years old, and it was really just the continuation of what I think is most important in life is perfect practice makes perfect. I haven't made any perfect wines yet, but I mean, depending on critics, yes, I have, but I don't agree with them.
Well, and so I'm curious to now, kind of like that's, I think of like there's the Larkmead phase, and then now we are fully headed into like realizing the vision of Massican. And, I think like I saw a couple questions come in from people, kind of 2 questions there. So one is, what was your thinking behind Napa's, only white wine winery? And then I'm curious, as a secondary, I see Meg Maker had a question there. Hi, Meg. Do you think that white wine is harder to make than red wine?
So when I can give you the pragmatic answer, I can give you the romantic answer, or I can give you both. The one thing, if anyone knows me, the one thing I don't do is I don't lie. I never lie about anything, and I'm brutally honest about what we do and how we do it in this industry. And it frustrates me when I see my friends, masquerading around the reality and the truth of things. So the one thing I did, I was very romantic about, not having a style of wines that I wanted to drink that I kind of grew up drinking in Italy for that 1 year during this, this Mediterranean climate. I was very romantic about that, nostalgic about why can't we do that here in Napa Valley and Sonoma County. So that was part one of Massican, but that came after the fact. The first thing I did was I love writing business plans. I love, I wrote magazine business plans. I was almost, hired by Timing to start a couple of magazines and all this other stuff that I had written up. And I love understanding how people engage with the concept and the idea. So I needed to understand my business, that I was, Larkmead was very small with an employees only kind of operation. It was like 5 of us during that time. So I wanted to, and I had my hand in a lot of different things. So I wanted to write a general concept of, soup to nuts, what the business looked like on paper. And I did that. And I just did it as a one-off, and I just priced it out. And I sent it to my best friends from business school. And I said, does this make sense to anybody? And they were all like, no, Napa Cabernet does not make sense. Like it's not a smart economic business to start. And I was like, yeah, I agree. I converted it to a white wine business plan, and I sent it to people, and everyone was like, something that could work. And the one crazy Sicilian who kind of introduced me to the Valle della Cate in Sicily, and kind of introduced me to a few people down there, said, hey, let's make wine. I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. And so I looked at it and I was like, something, this is great, because I focus 95% of my energy at Larkmead making red wine. I can use Massican as an ability for 3, kind of almost 3 steps. It's a quick turnover business. It is something that happens before the red wine harvest. I will be able to work with vineyards outside of my estates of Larkmead and see other regions and see how things are progressing. I will see the vintage for Larkmead before it even happens, because I'm now harvesting in warmer parts of the valley and eastern side of Napa, or southern in Carneros. So I was able to see how things were evolving around Napa Valley before I came into it. And it was kind of like a pre-harvest for it. And also it had this beautiful, quick turnaround, 6 months grape to glass, get it out into the market, sell it before September, and then, do it again. And, I went with Massican, I went from 400 cases up to, 4,800 cases in like 10, 11 years, by just organically doing that without ever putting any more money into the business after that first initial lump sum in 2009. Massican still remains a nonprofit business, but it's still, and that is for reasons why, I spend a ton of money in sales and marketing and editorial projects and things, things that I like that inspire me. So yeah, that was then, and after a while, everyone asked me, why aren't you making red wine? I said, well, not that I'm not making red wine, honestly, if anyone's familiar, and I know some of you on this call are very familiar with Massican and its arc of the wines I make, I don't know a single red grape variety in California that would fit into the Massican portfolio without being the odd wine out. I don't know how I could make something kind of naturally fit into that. And so if I do make a red wine for Massican, it won't be for Massican, it'll be for a sister winery. I have 40 other names I disregarded when I started Massican in 2009 that I can go back to and start another project, but have like that kind of parallel path. And then I glommed onto the fact that, holy shit, Massican was Napa Valley's only white wine winery. Stony Hill gave that up in 2009 when they started making Cabernet. I made that vintage for them at Larkmead. I think there's 1 or 2 other all white wine wineries in California. So does it mean anything to be Napa Valley's only white wine winery? No. But does it mean anything to be only something? Yes. It means that I care enough to focus on this 100% of the time, and therefore you got to give the kid it a try, because if this is their sole focus, maybe they do it well, and that's kind of it's kind of been my kind of marketing shtick on it for the last couple of years.
Well, and what about, so, right now, a lot of the grapes are using like Rivola Gialla, Tokai Friulano, all of the more Friulian, but then I think also like expanding into more Mediterranean whites. I was curious to know, do you envision like that you would, go into like some of the more like French Mediterranean, like the Grenache Blanc, Roussanne, like all of those types of varieties? Do you see that as a path forward for Massican?
As I got kind of, heavily into the conversation regarding climate change in Napa Valley a few years ago, and I continue it today with my work with the Napa Valley grape growers, the last question everyone ever always asked me, which I never had a proper response for, was like, well, what about Massican? Like, you're talking about the future of Napa Valley Cabernet. What about the future of like this thing you created? And I was like, I've always thought about white wines, and this goes back to the question: is making white wines hard or not? But Meg asked earlier. White wines, I've always felt, lived outside of the vintage, in a sense that they were impacted like any other grape variety, any other grapevine, through the early parts of the growing season. So from bud break all the way through fruit set. White, there's no kind of judgment of red or white. It's like the vine is a vine, and they're going to be impacted. Growing white wine grapes, in my opinion, I have this theory about the terroir and typicity of white wine versus red wine, in a sense that a white wine grape, the soul of a white wine is in its pulp and in its juice. The soul of a red wine is in the skins. And climate change impacts the evolution of the skins much more than it does impact the evolution of the juice of a grape. So what we call the must. So I always thought I lived a little bit outside of the vintage with regards to heat and drought during that that kind of stretch period between fruit set and mid-June all the way through veraison to harvest. And I could adjust accordingly based on the soul of that grape is always going to be unique to the variety and less typical of the place. And then therefore I didn't have to worry about the climatic conditions that are making it harder to perfectly ripen, phenologically ripen the skins of a Cabernet Sauvignon grape. So I always thought white wine and Massican had a little bit of a runway to the future. And most white wines have a runway to the future that red wines are going to struggle with as we start thinking about the next 20 to 30 years in North Bay wine country. And it includes Napa and Sonoma. So that's been my take on it. Varietals, I am going to, stick to. When I started Massican, I did the thing I told myself not to do, which is I gave it a name that not a lot of people could pronounce. I put grape varieties in it that not a lot of people knew about or knew how to pronounce. But I did the one thing that I thought was the most important thing, is I made delicious wines and unique wines, and they can you'll remember it from your honeymoon or from your vacation or your trip to the Mediterranean, whether it be Nice or Cannes or Amalfi or Sicily or somewhere else, and you just remember drinking this really cheap, bright, fresh, floral, almondy, citrusy white wine that went really well with whatever the fuck you were eating, right? And so I was like, if I can do that without like making it too distracting with regards to how to pronounce things and what the names and grapes. So I am open to anything moving forward. I am going to keep the focus right now a little bit down the pathway of Italy. I don't think I'm going to plant any more Ribolla Gialla. As you can see here, it's beautiful, it's saline, it's savory. I'm looking for a little bit more of the, as you get into the Ania, you start to see a little more of the high tone florals and a little bit of that kind of citrus notes that can be creamy, but also at the same time can be a little sharp, zesty. So I'm looking for anything. In 2021, I've the new grapes that I've added into my portfolio have only been one. It's Malvasia. I was trying to acquire some Albarino. I do think that Albarino is the grape of, honestly, the grape of the future of Napa Valley from a high end. If you're a high end Napa Valley Cabernet producer that makes a very expensive Sauvignon Blanc, $70, $50, $75, $100 or more, and if you're not looking at what John Consgard has accomplished with his Albarino, his barrel fermented aged Albarino, and looking at that and saying, wow, that's a delicious wine. And that's in the next 30 to 40, 50 years, Albarino is bulletproof when it comes to climate in California. So Sauvignon Blanc is not. So Sauvignon Blanc is not bulletproof. So that is one grape variety that I think could put $100 price point on it if you steal everything that John Consgard has done. But I mean, look, it's Napa Valley Cabernet producers we're talking about. They all basically do the same fucking thing. Excuse my French, but but yeah, I'm open. I'm excited. I mean, there's just so much opportunity. I have such a pathway to doing hopefully some cool stuff.
I love the Albarino idea. That is super exciting. Okay, but before we go too far, we got to get everyone sipping on the Anya if you have it, or whatever. And again, if you don't have it, no problem, because the martini will work just fine, or whatever you've got in front of you. But yeah, so this is the flagship, and maybe just can you talk people through, like, how does this differ from the Vino Bianco a little bit?
First and foremost, Massican, named after a mountain range in southern Italy, Monte Massico. It is where my great-grandparents were born. Their granddaughter was Ania, which was my mother. The reason why I named it after my mom is for twofold. She never drank white wine. Ania was the first white wine she ever drank. And
Wow.
since I've known her, she was always a red wine with ice cubes kind of gal. And so I named it fancifully because it was a blended white wine. It was a blend of Tokai Filano, Ribolla Gialla, and Chardonnay. It was my homage to the northeast of Italy, to a region outside of an hour outside of Venice, kind of caught between the Dolomites, the Alps, and then the sea right there. So the Adriatic, and I just loved how Tokai Filano and Ribolla had this amazing character to create these textures for table-friendly wines that went really well with food. And as you think about if the northeast of Italy, it's a very Germanic town. The whole place, north of Venice, there's no red sauce in their pastas. They're bordering Slovenia. Every Eastern European nation that ever wanted to conquer Italy over time had to come through that border. So they left their fingerprints and on the culture of food and wine there, or culture of food. And with that, that region is really good at white winemaking. And so making this wine my goal was to make a very table-friendly. Ani was supposed to be a very table-friendly white wine for the Mediterranean lifestyle, climate, culture, and Tokai and Ribolla do that really well because they come off, with great breadth of texture. They don't have tremendous ripping acidity. I pick on the lighter side, so they're lower alcohol, and that retains a little bit of the freshness in the wine through the malic acid. And they just have this, really kind of, floral, like I said earlier, and some citrus notes from the Tokai, those nice savory notes from the Ribolla, and then the Chardonnay is kind of like a glue. It's like the things that keep it all together, and also kind of fill in a little bit of the gaps. And
yeah, I mean, it's just so vibrant, and like the flavor intensity and the complexity and like all the layers of flavors in this wine. I think that's what, I think this is like, I think one of the reasons that Massican has been so successful is like, not like, these are wines that winemakers want to drink. These are wines that, like, it may remind you of your vacation, but it's just like, these wines go really with pretty much anything. Like, you can imagine, like your wife was saying, just drinking this on a random day of the week or whatever, and you're gonna look forward to it. Like, there's that like refreshing quality that just like keeps you coming back, but those layers of complexity and flavor that like make you like give it a moment, an additional beat of consideration before you're like moving on, which is so cool. I think that's one of the things I appreciate the most of these wines.
And you asked about differentiation earlier, and the one thing that I pride myself on with the wines is that, yes, each one of them is going to have a unique character, a unique kind of chord in the music. But the thread line needs to be there. The throughput needs to be there, in a sense that I need everyone to trust that Massican is going to put a delicious glass of wine on the table. If some of my production is micro, 250 cases, and it sells out and it's not available to you, and you like that wine, you're still going to like Massican if you drink something else in my kind of lineup. And that has always been important to me, because trust is the most important thing in a relationship you can have, especially with a customer. And that has really been, make these wines unique and different unto themselves, but make sure that they are very stylistically similar, so that someone could bounce around the portfolio and never get bored, and always have access to a glass of Massican, because I don't make enough wine right now for something to be completely available all times, everywhere. And I want to get there in a couple of years, but that's not how the brand evolved from from 09 to today.
So do you have some of the like earliest like I just love old Rivage blends. Like I had one from 1997 recently, like an old
Mm.
bottle that I found at a restaurant, and it was like just so amazing and still incredibly vibrant and like incredible. So do you still have like some of the early like 2009 2010s, and how are those drinking?
Yes, I do. I, I in the beginning, I don't have enough of them. In the beginning, I could never say no to anyone who asked to buy my wines. I'm like, wow, you really want to buy something I made? This is awesome. I'm like, I'm not going to like hoard it. So I sold everything. So I'm down to like almost 2 cases of everything pre 2016, basically. And what I do so this is the secret, join the Massican kind of inner circle. Almost every 2 years, I open up every bottle I've ever made. And the last 2019, for example, I did in the basement of a restaurant here in San Helena called the Charter Oak. And I started the process at like 10 o'clock in the morning. I told a few key friends, I said, this is what I'm doing, come here at noon. And then I posted it on social media and said, all the Massicans open. If you're in Napa Valley, come till 4 o'clock today. And then you can come in and taste everything. And it gives me, every 2 years tasting the wines, I can kind of paint the arc of all the wines. But a couple of things have changed since I started making wine in 2009. I changed my style of how I made the wines from 09 to 13. In the beginning, I was afraid that people wouldn't accept the acidity. So I was very big at using, everything was fermented in barrels and everything was batonnage. Batonnage is a process of stirring lees, bringing it up in suspension into the wine and allowing the wine to kind of pick at the flavors and the textures and enrich the wine and make it bolder, richer. It's also prematurely oxidizing the wine. So as white wine ages, it gets darker in color, deeper in flavor. Red wine will get lighter in color, looser in flavor. And so I try to get the wine available for release earlier, starting. And what I noticed after that process of tasting everything is like, I don't like how it's evolving. I don't like that it's already gone to this kind of like fast track pace of where it shouldn't be. So I changed my style a little bit in 14 and I started to embrace acidity and freshness. And then I started in 2020 with the the issues we all have here in California with wildfires and where you never know where something, a lightning strike will happen. Literally, I started kind of doing stuff like settling my wines overnight and extracting just the clean juice and eliminating a lot of the lees contact and kind of almost making like stainless steel vessel wines, but doing it in oak barrels and others. So my wine has gone through 3 stages of evolution, and I'm in the current 3rd stage right now of how I'm making the wines. And these are the 2 wines you're tasting. If you have them, the 2020 vintage is really like the start of that. And I replicated it in 2021 because there's still a lot of PTSD. I didn't know when no one in Napa Sonoma knew when the next fire was going to happen. Shit. We had 2 of them in August and September, 1-2 punch in 2020, and it was just brutal to our kind of it shook us to our core. So I don't, and honestly, look, I built Massican around this idea that I want them to be Mediterranean style white wines that are fresh and bright and vibrant, and you should be eating them, drinking them right upon release and like enjoying them. I didn't build it around like, oh, this is great white Burgundy, or like old crazy Sancerre. I don't particularly like some of those older white wine flavors. They're just not as attractive to me on my palate as they are for some others. But no, I appreciate a lot. I know Meg, who's on this call, has applauded the older versions of the wines, and I appreciate her for that. But it's just not. It's not the wines I want to drink. It's not how I envision Massican.
And okay, so I know we're going to run out of time soon. So there is so much I want to cover. Okay. But I think one of the things, like, I would just be remiss if I did not mention all of the really crazy, cool projects that you do. So we've got Instagram magazine, which has gone through all sort of iterations. So this is the Massican Instagram magazine, a partnership with Phaidon Press. And then, so we had like architecture issues, design issues, travel and food, which I think of as like more of like an aspirational kind of lifestyle grouping of content. And then now more recently, we've gone into identity politics, cryptocurrency, news. So like, kind of a turning of some of those topics. And I'm curious to know, like, what is your thinking around this publishing project that you do, and like what is like the evolution of it, as you know, as you're thinking about it right now.
Oh, thank you. It's a big part of my life. It never left me, as I said earlier. I'm still a lover of magazines and content and storytelling through that venue. But on my 10th anniversary of Massican, I said, okay, I'm going to redesign my label. I'm going to redesign my website. I'm going to redesign my Instagram. Well, what do each of those things need to look like? And everything I did had to have a story behind this, the detail. So whether it be the label and the color blue, which is a 1500-year-old, taken from a 1500-year-old fresco and is now recorded in the Harvard Library, like someone wrote a story about that, like literally wrote a story about that. And because it was a very well thought out, kind of intention, and it had marketing intentions, but also had personal intentions. I'm like, my great grandparents or my great grandparents who lived in the Massican Hills probably saw that fresco when they were like traveling around Pompeii, so there was a connection there at some capacity. And so when I decided to redesign my Instagram, I was like, well, what I want to really put out there for everybody is I want to put out that like slim errands, this sepia toned view of the Mediterranean, how it was this other time, another place, and it was bucolic and beautiful and sexy and sassy and all the things that you're like, oh my God. And I'm like, I want to do that. And a lot of people do that with their social media. And a lot of people just steal other people's photos and download them from the web. And I'm like, from a publishing perspective, I pay for content, and it's important to me. It's important for me if the content, good editorial content exists. So I saw an opportunity, with Phaidon, who is turning 100 years old next year, with a lot of my friends in the editorial space in the wine community. The one thing like no one's really talking about is like the people who are writing my content are all wine writers, not writing about wine.
Yeah.
And giving them a venue to do some really cool shit is really important to me. It's important to keep editorial alive. And I just didn't feel comfortable. You know me for a long time, Erica. There's no way I'm just gonna, put an Instagram out there with a bunch of bottle shots of Massican.
that would be off brand. If it's not like zany and super cool and like, wow, no one's done that before, then you're like probably not going to do it.
Probably not Dan Petroski. So that was important to me to keep that focus. And the big thing about the transition from lifestyle was just escapism. It was aspiration, and we all needed to leave our quarantine. And that's where the Phaidon opportunity happened, and it was amazing. But the current, situation, we're 5 issues in. I've just read the December piece this morning. It's about regenerative farming, written by David Lynch. Doesn't talk about wine at all, which is great. It basically came out of the fact that my pod and like everyone's pod during quarantine and COVID, we drank a lot of wine, and after a couple glasses of wine, we had a lot of great conversations, and none of them were about the wine. It was about social injustice and unrest in America in June 2020. Then it was about voting rights during the election of 2020 in November. Then it was about like the Civil War in January of 2021. And so these things are important to me. We talked about them, and so it felt really good for me to say wine people are a little more interesting than what they put on social media and what they write about themselves on their websites, and what journalists write about wine all the time. And like the last thing I care about is being part of a list of the craziest, coolest, wackiest white wines coming out of Napa Valley. I'm like, I care a little about that. I want someone to talk about the fact that I lost customers for my mailing list because I had a Southern Black woman write about voting rights in my magazine, and I lost Texas customers because they said, I thought you were a winery. That, look, you know something, I'm just having a conversation here. I'm not taking a stance. I'm being very, you don't, I just, yeah, don't get me started. But
well, I mean, I feel like
look,
it's,
this is,
it's like a cultural, it's a cultural moment. And like, part of it, it feels to me like as an observer of the publications that you've done, it's like, like first it was like lean out escapism, and now it's like lean into the issues and lean into the conversation. So I feel like it's like, maybe it's like a shift of the aperture or a shift of the perspective or what have you.
yeah.
That I mean, it feels very timely as someone who also is a publishing nut and chooses to spend a lot of hours of the day on that every day. So okay, so I know that we are super running out of time, and I promised everyone we could go on for hours and hours, but I promised everyone that we would have a chance to bring our attendees on to ask questions. So everyone who wants to come on, we're going to invite you on for a live Q&A. You can choose, if you don't want to be on camera, no problem, just turn your camera off or decline the opportunity to become a panelist, but we're gonna do that right now. And then as part of this, if you do want to be on camera, we're going to take a group shot at the end and post it on social media afterwards. So you're agreeing to that if you come aboard and say hello with us. Welcome.
I said, yeah, Eric, we're just continuing our conversation from last week. But I'm also a New Yorker, so I talk fast, and I also I have a lot of stories and a lot of, like I said, everything I try to do has to have a story behind it, or it just doesn't. I won't try to do it frivolously, and I know people, we do that a lot in all industries. It's not just wine. We just try to like create content for sake of creating content, and
right.
I have a hard time with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the, there's like the authenticity piece, of course, but then like the just no bullshit approach of like, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm thinking about. This is what me and my friends are discussing at this moment. So like, let's have these real conversations, which, I particularly appreciate. So anyone who is interested in asking a question, like you can kind of like raise your hand or, and then I'll just, unmute people as I see hands go up. Anyone? Let me see. Oh, wait, I saw a hand, but I missed it. Oh, here we go. Joe Cruz. Can you unmute yourself? Yep, cool.
I sure can. Hi there.
Hi.
Hey, Jan. Jan, when I met you for the first time briefly, I think that was just last week, I knew I liked you immediately. Fellow New Yorker. I knew there was something in you that I was like, I like this man. Now, I was just curious, do you find your wines appeal more or less to certain segments of the wine drinking population? And you don't get to say everybody. What do you find generally?
100%, I do.
People?
No, 100%. I do feel like my initial launch into the brand was, I leaned very heavily into, I was very small production, doing something very unique that only a small segment of the population would care about, which is, these Northeast Italian white wines being made in Napa Valley. So it was a lot of a hand sell. It was a lot of a slightly more engaged, exploratory wine drinker, but also some that may have had some of the wines that inspired me from Italy. And so it was definitely more towards sommeliers. And, even to this day, after 12 years, 60% of all the wines I produce are sold in restaurants nationwide. Of that, 30% of the wines are sold by the glass. So 30% of all the wines I produce are sold by the glass at restaurants nationwide. I am only in 12, 14 markets, so it's not a lot of cities that are driving that. So they're mostly urban, and they're mostly kind of fine dining because of my price points. But then the people have found that Massican is really a table-friendly white wine, and eventually my back label will say white table wine, which is kind of a very European thing to say on a wine label. But yeah, it was a small click. But as I've kind of looked at the world, and I said, there's a lot of people out there drinking Kim Crawford, and there's a lot of people out there drinking Cloudy Bay, and there's a lot of people out there drinking Santa Margarita. And my wines don't veer too far from those, not even in price point in some instances. So I do think I have a larger piece of the pie that I could talk to if I just, figure out a way to get in front of them.
Thanks, Dan.
Great. Any other questions? Go ahead and right there, Kristen, go for it.
Hi, Dan. Such a pleasure to meet you. We both share a love for Italy. That's actually how I got into the wine industry as well. I've lived over there a couple of times, but I'm always curious with brilliant winemakers like yourself. You clearly have an amazing palate. What are some of your favorite dishes to pair with your wines?
Great question. Where did you live?
So I lived actually just outside of Torino.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I lived there for a while, and then I actually lived in Germany for a few years and just traveled to Italy as frequently as possible.
So the good thing about the culture, and I asked you that because I wanted to kind of like direct this conversation to where you live, but the good thing about the culture of Northern Italy is that it's not necessarily, as I said earlier, I jokingly said that my, Friuli is not like a red sauce Italian region. It's not a tomato region, right? So as you get up to the north and you get to Torino and you get to Milano and Piedmont and all the good stuff going on up there. A lot of, truffles, we're in truffle season right now, but you're also, very mushroom heavy friendly, like very savory, kind of cream sauces and so forth and so on. And similarly with, the Northeast side, so you travel 4 hours across the top of Italy and you're eating things like, goulash, meat and veal based stews, and you're drinking white wine. But obviously then you both have, both sides of the north have Mediterranean sea influences, and that kind of goes in there. So I love the Massican wines because my favorite dishes were of everything from pork-based dishes to venison to potato-based dishes to kind of fish, kind of grilled fish, heavy fish that don't necessarily taste like briny fish, like a little more richer styles of cooking, with smoke and fire, open fire. So yeah, I've made it important to me that my wines should kind of be versatile, as much on the table as possible. And Anya, if your glass was dark and you couldn't see the wine, you were blindfolded, and you didn't swirl it and smell it, you just put it in your mouth, it has a texture of a red wine, and that's where you can break some rules with food pairing.
Sure, more versatility. Awesome, thank you.
All right, other questions? We got some out there. We got only a couple people came through. Come on, go ahead, ask some questions. We got a couple more minutes of Dan's time, and now
they just want the picture with me.
I know exactly. All right. Well, I have a question because I do want to know. So, so can you tell me? Because I'm trying to research this for my own interest. Who are 3 winemakers in California that you sort of more maybe up and coming winemakers or winemakers that maybe, I might just be becoming familiar with or not familiar with, but I'm essentially looking to try some new wines in California and I'm not sure where to look.
You can't ask me that. I'm gonna ostracize myself from the community.
What do you mean ostracize yourself?
I got a lot of great friends here, and I love their wines for different reasons. And obviously, I grew up here as a Cabernet producer, and but if I had to say, the couple of wines that I really adore that I think are just rocking. They're not made from, from the next gen winemakers here. They're made from people who've been here that are kind of branching out and doing their own cool shit. And I think about the one guy in particular. I think about Chris Phelps, who was a winemaker at Dominus for over 15 years during their kind of heyday, and he has a really incredible Cabernet Sauvignon called Ad Vivum, which is under the $125 price point, and it's not a ripoff of Dominus in any way, shape, or form, but it's just a modern version of that, and it still has a lot of energy and tension. And then similarly, I think of, when I was a young wine drinker, I always looked to the second growths of Bordeaux or the second label of wineries. And, my first one I ever found in Napa was with Heidi Barrett when her La Serena label, when she made some Sangiovese back in the mid to late 90s. And so I think of Francois Pechon, who, was the Arajo winemaker for years. And I think about the project she did with Lisa Drinkwood. And so there's I think of Thomas Brown and his Rivers Marie project. If you look at the 500 clients he has, and then you look at what he does with Rivers Marie, it's completely different. And all these winemakers have success in their own right, but they do something that's unique and passionate, something they love on, you know, in their spare time. And I think that's where, you know, you can find great value and you can find great stories. So as I was saying earlier, it's how I tricked, you know, my clients at all the, you know, healthcare companies eating dinner with me and trying to sell them Time magazine adverts into buying cheaper wines by telling them a really cool story.
Yeah. All right. I've literally just taken notes. So now I've got some new recommendations to try. Thank you.
And Erica, before you drop off, when are we going to see Picks go live so we can all get online and start buying and selling wine and learning about new shit?
Well, this is a great question. So people can go on right now and sign up for our beta and start to get a sense for what the platform is. So this is a wine discovery platform that has 3 different components. It's got this intuitive search engine, and that's coming to life right now. We have our content, which is our publication, The Drop, and we've been live since June. We're publishing a ton of great content every day. The URL is pix.wine/the-drop. But just go to pix.wine and you'll see the publication there. And then the last thing is really experiences like this, sort of community-driven events for the people who use Pix. So those are all of the pieces that we're bringing together into one platform. And, you know, everyone, we hope you'll come and try it. And if you have feedback on this event, we would love to hear it. Please email us at the emails that you got earlier. I think those if people reply, those will go back to us, right? Those are actual emails, right? Erica, is that correct? Give me a nod.
Yeah, so reply to the ones, not the Eventbrite reminders, but events@pix.wine.
Events@pix.wine. Those will come to us. And if there are people that you would love for us to talk to in the future, or different, you know, events that you'd like to see through Pix, please let us know. We would love to hear from you. So thank you everyone so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.